high hopes again for the Current? Any reason to believe otherwise? There's a coaching change that could switch things up a little bit.
Look, I said this about Orlando a year ago, coming off of one of the best seasons we've ever seen in league history. You just can't sustain that. I mean, it's totally unrealistic. So the idea that Kansas City could do anything close to winning the league by 21 points again, setting scoring records, it's not going to happen.
Joining us now and entering the Three Timers Club, he's been covering soccer with an emphasis on advancing the women's game since 2008. In 2009, he launched The Equalizer, the leading website dedicated exclusively to comprehensive women's soccer coverage in North America, before joining ESPN to become the outlet's lead NWSL and U.S. women's national team reporter. When it comes to previewing the NWSL season, he's our high-impact player. It's Jeff Kassouf. Hi, Jeff.
Hello. I love that. How many people are in the Three Timers Club? How exclusive?
Just a few.
Okay.
Just a few.
Cool.
I think we have maybe one 5-timer that we owe a jacket to, but I think, yeah, you're up there for sure. And you are our go-to. And I can't believe the NWSL season is almost here, but we have a bigger than ever league to preview because now we got 16 teams set to start their campaigns this weekend. And I want to start with the two new teams because Denver and Boston, actually the first two teams to build an entire roster without a draft. So I want to know how you think they each did, and can either of them pull off a San Diego Wave, Bay FC, and actually make a postseason run in year one?
Yeah, so I think, two different situations. You look at Denver, I think it's a team that has leaned into NWSL experience, whether that's in the front office or on the field. I mean, certainly you see that with the roster construction, and obviously Lindsay Heaps will be coming in the summer. Boston, I think, is this sort of on and off the field, which I'm sure we'll get to, kind of this enigma of I think it's fascinating. I have no idea how it's going to play out because more than anything we've seen, and to your point, it's sort of unprecedented territory, but the direction they've gone being so international / sort of not NWSL experienced from front office to on the field as well is really fascinating. So I think, there's obviously a gamble to that. I think maybe Denver's play in that sense, at least on the field, certainly is a little bit safer in knowing what you're getting in a league that has not always been kind to first-time folks, whether that's players or coaches. So I think Boston's going to be fascinating in that sense because they've really gone for a new model that obviously they think will work. I have no idea if it's going to work in year one, if I'm being totally honest with you. But to your question of, are playoffs possible? Yes, it is a bigger field, but if you've got 8 that get in, I think, you should at least be shooting for a playoff berth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm speaking from the outside. I've not dug in deep on exactly what Boston's doing, but it feels like in terms of hiring in front office, they're leaning very analytics heavy. They're bringing in a ton of people that view the game maybe a little bit differently than the rest of the NWSL. So that's kind of exciting and maybe offsets some of the concerns early on that mostly stemmed from their name and their marketing campaign. I think they got a bad rep for a lot of things on that side of the ball, but then now you look and the decision making they've done in terms of hiring is maybe a little exciting, like you said, unproven. But do you feel like, okay, I actually kind of like the approach they're taking when it comes to the numbers and the strategy?
For Boston, yeah. I think, look, I think it was more than the name too, right? The stadium is something that hangs over them still. We're going to Foxborough in a few days. That wasn't the plan. I think we should, by all accounts, see that white stadium finished for 2027. But, I've said it before, and I don't think, I think we've maybe even talked about it before. It's a disservice to sugarcoat things too, right? They had the longest lead time of any expansion team in history, and they wasted a lot of it, from the name, having to redo that, to the stadium. So, I think that is something we can't overlook, that they're playing in Foxborough in Rhode Island this year. It doesn't mean that things won't be great when they get to White Stadium, or they won't be great on the field. But, I think that's been the thing that I'm really interested to see how they kind of bounce back from that. I don't think they'll get fully past that until they're in White Stadium in terms of that sort of narrative off the field. But, on the field, I think, I spoke with Philippa Patum when she was hired, the head coach. And, again, I don't know how it's going to work out exactly, but I think anybody would run through a brick wall for her if you talk to her for 30 minutes. So I think it's a fascinating sort of, really even more so than Denver, who I think has done more with the stadium build and everything. But,
right.
It's a fascinating sort of project in Boston.
We had Dome Gauch on the show, and I have to admit I was unsure. And then I was very much charmed and excited about what he had to say and what he might do with the team. Can you remind our listeners where the White Stadium project is right now? What's the status?
Yeah. Now set to be completed in 2027. The renovation, the short version of it for the listeners of the public-private finance with Boston Public Schools, hit a lot of roadblocks that are probably even beyond us in terms of Boston politics and mayorals with, the crafts. There's finally like advancement on construction, but the plan was certainly to play, day one in that stadium fully renovated. And I think, it might even be generous the way things have gone to say a year from now, but some point in 2027, I think is looking more realistic.
When it comes to Denver, there's a great thing when you can bring in a Lindsay Heaps, a fan favorite. You sell jerseys, you get people excited and have some names people are used to. It also can be tough when you look at a team like maybe Angel City, where you're banking on veterans to help start things, but then maybe you get caught up on the wrong side of those players' abilities. Are you concerned at all with the safe approach from Denver? They do have a lot of young, unproven talent too, though, there.
No, I'm not. I don't find it concerning. I mean, I think certainly from a roster standpoint of the two expansion teams, like we said, much more predictable, and maybe that's a synonym for safe, I guess. But I think what you're getting in a sense of if you're an expansion team. I mean, you asked me earlier, is there a San Diego season in it? I mean, maybe. I don't think either of these teams are going to be Shield contenders, but I think it's realistic to say playoffs are a goal and attainable. And I think the big challenge with Heaps coming in the summer is just kind of how you have to kind of split the season of managing it without her for that first half and then managing it when she comes. But I think it's a longer term signing. To me, it's a signing that, I mean, she signed for the long term, and obviously we can talk age and everything, but to me, it's a signing that if you look at the rest of the roster, the fact that there's more to be done this summer to plan for next year, I think that the big plan in Denver is probably 2027 when you're looking on the field, not to concede this year, but right. I think that's when you look at the Heap signing and maybe some other possibilities that, that's the year for them that they're really looking to make some noise. Just
remember, for those who don't, that Lindsay Heaps will be joining midseason because she's finishing out her contract with Lyon. So they will have to figure out how do we make sure we are set up for when she arrives, but also not, to your point, like conceding and waiting around for her to show up. Pretty exciting for both teams. 45,000 tickets sold for Denver's opener at Mile High, but the Legacy have New Kids on the Block at Gillette at halftime. So I think it's toss up there. Speaking of Gillette, they're playing a handful of games there in year one. That's a 65,000 seat facility. Tough to fill, even for a new team that has a lot of excitement. For a lot of teams, getting 10,000 is great. But 10,000 doesn't feel very good in a 65,000 seat stadium. So any thoughts on how it will affect the team's vibe or the fan base trying to get together and rally around this team if they're sort of not even filling out the lower bowl?
Yeah, I don't know about the team vibe, but certainly from a fan base perspective, I think if you're a fan, you waited we haven't even said yet, right? The Breakers, their history, they go away. If you're a Boston fan, like the disappointment and heartbreak of that, to then get a team back, I think I'm speaking for them a little bit, but I think they're probably happy to just have it back, right? If they've got to wait the year for White Stadium or whatever. But it's been, even from that fan perspective, the choppy start of, all right, White Stadium's not going to be ready, which I think anybody logically paying attention knew that was coming. But then it was, all right, we're in Foxborough. And then the Rhode Island piece, especially some of the fan reaction I saw, was a bit abrupt in terms of how it was brought on. It was announced after there were sort of, I think, your select a seat or season deposits at Gillette. So I do think that, going from Boston, I mean, if you look at it on the map, you just progressively get farther away from, White Stadium to Foxborough to Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Yeah. That's pretty jarring from a fan perspective. I think you could argue maybe there's some long-term impact there, but yeah, to your point of, Foxborough, where it is, filling it out, it's tough. I think the Reign have this problem the most. San Diego with the dip in attendance had it a little bit. To have 7,000 people in a 60,000 plus stadium, it's not a great environment. And it's going to be difficult if that's the case. And I would say they're trending. I mean, they've announced about 20,000 for the opener as of recording here. I think that's a good, respectable number. Maybe it's champagne problems from the early years, but the home opener is a novelty event. So what's, game 2 and 3 in iffy New England weather? I think that's where you start to wonder for sure. But you could maybe say the same thing about Denver, the big event for the first one. And then, they didn't plan to play in Dick's Sporting Goods. Their stadium is sitting on a shipping container in LA, so I think these are expansion problems.
Yeah, absolutely. A team that we thought might have more problems last year and didn't was Gotham. Great transition, Spain. They had another surprise title run. They won it from the 8th seed, and this was their second championship in 3 seasons. We spent so much time last offseason worried about roster shakeups, and then they went and won it. So what do you expect from the returning champs this year?
Yeah, good question. I think you want to see consistency, certainly if you're a Gotham fan. I think I would expect to see more of that. It's a team that, the 2 titles in 3 years can be deceiving because they came from, bottom seed in each case, changed scenarios, obviously. But, I think that can be a little bit deceiving, but the talent's there. They're also, the dichotomy of it of like some of the in-league struggles, but then, in May of last year, in the midst of that, they're winning the CONCACAF title and winning the region for the first time and going to, the first FIFA event. So, I think...
Which they forfeited, according to headlines. They forfeited all the money by losing. What a ridiculous word choice for them just not winning it.
Definitely, underperformed. I think disappointing to not even make the final there. But
for sure.
Having a full season or even more than like 2 months of Jaden Shaw, presumably keeping Rose Lavelle fully healthy. She's been spectacular for the last year or so, but this time last year, she was still coming back from a surgery. So, I think having that consistency is, you would expect certainly a more consistent season. And I think they're still in that group that maybe it was this time last year, we talked about 3-4 teams that should distance themselves. I think they're in that group. And, maybe that we'll get to, there's a little bit more of a question mark around some of those other teams now too.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Kansas City Current. They ran away with the Shield. They felt inevitable. We were like, this is boring. They're going to win everything. And then they fell to Gotham in the quarterfinals. Temwa Shawinga will be back, hopefully healthy for the season. In a terrifying twist, she's going to be joined by Croy Bethune, one of my favorite players in the league, who left the Washington Spirit for the Current in the offseason. High hopes again for the Current. Any reason to believe otherwise? There's a coaching change that could switch things up a little bit.
I do have some questions about the Current, and I don't think that's like, that doesn't mean that they're going to be 8th place or missing the playoffs, but I don't know. Look, I said this about Orlando a year ago, coming off of one of the best seasons we've ever seen in league history. You just can't sustain that. It's totally unrealistic. So the idea that Kansas City could do anything close to winning the league by 21 points again, setting scoring records, it's not going to happen. And part of that is a regression of the mean, I would say, but also like Shawinga, I don't know how healthy she is. That's all been a bit guarded. How serious is that? Even if it's not serious, quote unquote, it's been an issue that's lingered now for long enough that on and off it's been a problem. And what does that mean? Because we know that they play so different when they don't have her on the field, which really was the story of that Gotham quarterfinal. So I think if she's not ready beginning of the season, and if that stretches for a while, add into that Bia has departed, who I don't think ever got enough credit. Croy Bethune coming in, to your point. There's plenty of talent here, but then you add in the Chris Armas hire, which again, I think a lot of unknowns. First time really in the women's pro game. The short stint at a, not necessarily a big college in the women's side. I think you could say tactics are tactics, sure. But, there's a learning curve there that he somewhat readily admitted in terms of understanding opponents, understanding the league more. So I think that there are a few factors there that could add up in a way that Kansas City is, I think will be in the mix, but might not cruise at all in the way that they did last year.
You don't want to undermine a head coach, but when you have someone like Vlatko that's still in the building working, do you get a sense for the idea that he could work with Chris, or would it feel like, hey, we need to create a separation here because it's going to make things difficult for Chris to take over if Vlatko's in his shadow?
No, I think it's absolutely working with, but to your point, I think you could find, and top of mind, I don't have them. You cover more sports than I do, but there's enough examples of like coming in and being the guy after the guy, especially if the first guy is still there, that creates some odd dynamics. I think even in Washington a few years ago, where there was some dynamics of like, the hiring, you had Mark Krikorian in, and he came in and he, came off this incredibly successful head coaching stint in college. And, he's obviously a coach coming into, a director of soccer ops or a GM type of role. And that creates a different dynamic than maybe a GM who's never been a head coach. So I don't know what it will mean again, but, I think that there's a level of expectation and understanding of that coaching role that doesn't always exist in every team.
Yeah. Spirit got their girl in Trinity Rodman, lost Bethune. What do you expect from this DC team? They've been so close for 2 years running. They got the biggest piece back, but what else might they now be missing, especially if they're spending a whole bunch of money in one spot?
I don't think missing a lot. I mean, they got creative enough with, the biggest contract we've ever seen in the league or the world from everything that I do understand from fully checking that.
I know. I love that every report was close to, might be, probably is biggest contract in women's soccer.
I'm confident in saying that. I will say
good.
that. But, I think they were creative enough as much as they could be in the accounting for that in terms of how do you spread it? How do you use this new HIP rule? All of that. So I don't think, losing Croy Bethune obviously is a hit, but I think this is a team that's still deep. It's still very talented. I would expect, to the points we just made about Kansas City, of any of these sort of contenders that existed before, Washington to me is the one that sort of stayed, right where they were in a good way. And I would expect them to be back in it, 2 straight final losses. Of course, the bar there is go win it. But yeah, I think that they are, as much as anybody, maybe potentially the standard setters for the season.
Nice. We saw Soph Smith back in action for Portland and, friendly ahead of the season. Great sign that she'll be ready to go and is going to be a part of this Thorns team. They were a surprising 3 seed by the end of last year. What do you expect from them this season?
I think it's going to be a tough year in Portland. I do. I know I've said that before, but, Sophia Wilson coming back is going to be a huge boost, obviously. But, does it become really what became an issue sort of pre-maternity leave, which was Thorns struggle, need to get bailed out. Sophia Wilson could do that and repeat. And, you look at Hina Sugita leaving at the end of the season, toward the end of the season, Sam Coffey departing in the offseason. No real like-for-like replacements yet. Maybe that happens in the summer, but bigger issue there too then. This coaching process, this hiring process of firing Rob Gale in late November to making a decision, call it late February, mid-February, whenever it was made. But, 3 months to get a coach who then loses preseason, who might not even be here, it doesn't look like, for the opener based on visas. And when does that happen? So to me, you've really lost, a full preseason. You've probably conceded the first half of this season. It doesn't mean you're not going to win a game, but I think you're in trouble in that sense. I think from these perspectives, I do think for a team, I would say it like this, and I write as much in something forthcoming. I don't know when you're, I guess.
What a tease.
I think this might be out before that, but like the standard in Portland has always been set the bar globally. That's on and off the field. Off the field, obviously still leading the league in attendance. On the field, I don't think they're doing that. And I think they're playing some catch up with some of these other teams.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like, and I look forward to seeing what this ownership group of both the Portland Fire, the new expansion WNBA team, and the Thorns can do. But the Fire were also playing catch up in terms of hirings and figuring out their front office. So it's a question of what is that ownership group doing that's from afar, not in market all the time, and how are they going to handle some of the big decision making to get this team back to what it was before their purchase, which is, yet to be seen. Soph is back. Any idea when we can expect to see Mel Swanson?
Well, we saw that she's back into a level of training, in and around the team. That's always a good sign. They haven't been specific, and I honestly don't have a specific date. So, I would think, sooner is better, especially for her trying to get ramped up when you think about not that much time until a World Cup too on an international level. But I'm not sure of a date.
I would like to commend the girlies on timing their pregnancies right in that middle of the time ahead of another World Cup and an Olympics. Like they really nailed that. It was very impressive. Racing Louisville, let's talk about them. They finally broke their curse of 9th place finishes to make the playoffs, nearly took out the Spirit, went down to PKs. Can Bev Yanez and company be a semifinal or further team again this year?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most fascinating on-field only stories, so to speak, of Louisville, a team that I think a franchise that is, has a lot of questions about its, long-term future. I think a lot of people continue to look at that and wonder, but, from on field, a team that sort of punches above its weight. I think, I said throughout last fall, a team that you don't want to meet in the playoffs because it has that capability to win a one-off game. And to your point, I was at Audi Field for that. It never totally felt like they were in it, but they just hung around, and then they obviously made things interesting. So I think that's exactly their DNA. Can you make that sustainable over not just a season, but multiple seasons as teams sort of figure you out? I think that's a big question. I think I'm a big Bev Yanez fan, so I think at minimum she'll have the group motivated and bought in. I just saw a little bit of her talking about the team culture again. I think that's that sort of blue collar DNA in Racing Louisville that you have to have, because they readily admit they're not going to spend more on players than some of these teams. They're not going to attract some of these players. So I think, how they follow that up might be the most interesting question for a franchise that doesn't always get a lot of attention.
Yeah. Well, fans should give them attention. It's a great place to go watch a game. It's a fun city to visit. The stadium's awesome. Like, if people haven't thought about Louisville as a potential NWSL road trip, I recommend it. I always have a good time down there. We ask this every year, and I think I might actually be contractually obligated to ask, is this the year Angel City adds soccer success to the resume of business and sponsor and promotional and attendance success?
Oh, man. Well, I would say at minimum, they need to, right? Because I don't think a lot of factors last year, even locally, I'm well aware of things that extended beyond soccer, but you saw the hit at the gate. I think it was not only noticeable in numbers with the drop, but really when you looked at that stadium, you tune in and say, whoa, like this place
used to be such a scene.
Typically much more full. So I can't, the struggles on the field were a factor, maybe not the factor. So I think they need to, from that perspective, I think losing Alyssa Thompson at the time they did, in the way they did, at minimum, extremely dejecting, right? The hometown hero and this is not speaking of her, but of where it leaves Angel City in that sense. To leave, mid-season or late in the season, I think that they were already in a rebuild, as it were, but she was the focal point of it, or forthcoming one. And so her departure, I think, sets that back a little bit further even. So I think the playoffs have to be a minimum here. I don't think this is a team contending for a shield. You get in the playoffs, anything can happen, but they need to make the playoffs from a business perspective, from a sporting perspective. Can they and will they? We'll see. I don't think, I think it should be a little bit more wide open this year when you look across the field of teams and the various things we've talked about with some of the favorites even, and questions around them, that, that there should be an opportunity to do that.
They lost a couple big names, beloved players, but folks who maybe weren't contributing in the same way they used to. Allie Riley, Kristen Press among them. They're actually one of the bottom teams in the league in terms of returning player minutes from last year. So change could be a good thing. They've got Riley Tiernan, a young star who could be doing big things. Emily Sams comes over. That's an interesting dynamic switch there. In terms of roster, do you see reasons to be optimistic, or is it just the same as every year where it's like, well, this has got to be the year, right? Without even necessarily having a reason to say so, you're just like, it feels like it needs to be.
Well, I think Hina Sugita, if you talk to anybody in LA, and certainly we've seen that, before her arrival there, she came over so late. The season was pretty much dead for them at that point. So to have the full year out of her, to make her a focal point, I think that's, a huge one. Your point about Emily Sams, for sure, to shore up a back line that, I'm thinking about this time last year, they played in Orlando, where I remember, and I don't have the score in front of me, but I remember the first half, I was, to your point, I was like, okay, Angel City, they're looking good against Orlando. It's early season. And then halftime came and that all changed, right? So it's just the consistency factor for me. That's been it since day one for them. Consistency, and I'm talking day one, years back, within a game, within a season. So I think Sugita is a big reason for optimism. Emily Sam shoring up the back line. So yes, I think from a roster perspective, Kennedy Fuller, again, is a very good young talent. Riley Tiernan, I'm also high on. I think you've got to kind of capture lightning in a bottle twice there, potentially, with how she stormed onto the scene. So you got to figure that out. But yes, there's reason for that optimism. Yeah,
they will see her coming now in a way that they weren't before. Any of the rest of the teams from the table that you see contending this season that I didn't mention?
I am interested in what Denver does. North Carolina. I think Orlando is a team that I'm interested to see. The talent there is still there. I mean, I think Marta will be playing until she's 60 potentially, and probably still nutmegging folks
as she should.
No, I mean, San Diego's a team again with, there was a lot of turnover. I think we saw a lot of potential. I am curious if you think about the typical arc of an NWSL contender. And I'm thinking about Orlando actually, where, that 2024 double winning season that they had was irreplicable. But if you paid attention, you saw it in 2023. You saw the foundation for it. I think, there's San Diego, it's like a little bit of whiplash sometimes with what's going on there. But I do think that they showed us moments last year where the possession was there. The style of play was there. Now, can you put it all together and win? Delphine Cascarino leaving, is a hit. But, Kenza Dali, they bring in Luzmila. We believe they'll be bringing in or potentially bringing in Kat Macario. So you put all those things together. I am interested to see if last year was sort of the inconsistent foundation for potentially San Diego being, making a lot more noise this year.
And I believe you mean whiplash just metaphorically, and not that J.K. Simmons is Jill Ellis and the toxic behind the scenes behavior is reminiscent of the movie with Miles Teller. But it's possible that it was a double meaning there. We're still trying to sort all that out when it comes to the San Diego Wave. International players, are there any coming to the NWSL this year that we should be particularly looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a big one. I mean, for starters, Heap's coming home. I know on the end of that, end of the career arc potentially, but that is a good reverse trend, so to speak, for Americans leaving, even if it's not necessarily like, for an easy example, at the same team like Lily Johannes coming over at the beginning of her career, but it is a good sign. I'm interested, we talked about Boston again, sort of the mystery. I mean, Amanda Gutierrez, I think, is somebody who probably, I don't know, many people, including myself, maybe have talked about, but, really interested to see how she adapts to the league, if she can kind of force herself into the big time player, chase a golden boot type of scenario or conversation. So I think that's probably, one of them that jumps out, or a big one from like a mystery perspective, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about a few rookies to keep an eye on this year? We don't hear about a draft in the sense of that telling us who might be the best. We can just look at sort of college success, but.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the rookie, Jordan Dudley going to Gotham. I think, even sort of behind the scenes, I think a lot of promise, a lot of hype. I mean, certainly if a US fan who's paid attention to kind of the youth national teams will know that name, or anybody who's followed college ball. So I think she really jumps out as, again, you're in this era of kind of, Riley Tiernan being a good example, maybe of, you can always find a diamond in the rough. I'm thinking of like a Bethany Balser from years past too, but now in this era where you've got to kind of get these college signings right, because you're not drafting them on the idea that you now have their rights and you can make them come to training camp and you don't have to sign them to a contract until April 1st or something. Like now you're signing these players and you need to get it right. So I think Dudley's one that, is probably in that very much more pro-ready sort of stratosphere that, I don't know, I think of like totally different position, but like when Claire Hutton came into the league at, she had just kind of turning 18 in that beginning of the year. When I was talking to people, I still, she was the real deal. I think briefly was calling her Claire the real deal Hutton, and she's played out that way. I mean, she might be a World Cup starter. Those are players you've got to get it right, and I think Dudley's probably in that category, among others.
We mentioned Alyssa and Angel City and that sort of, I think, shocking in the middle of the season move.
Yeah.
Publicly, the NWSL will brush off most of their concerns about the Alyssas and the Naomi Girmas.
No.
And, they'll talk about the international talent coming back. Behind the scenes, do you think the NWSL is freaking out, even though they've put that high impact player rule into place and maybe are trying to convince us that that's satisfactory enough to stem future waves of players leaving?
I think maybe not freaking out in that conjugation or that tense. I think if you look at her leaving in September amid everything that was already happening, amid uncertainty and how it played out in the months that followed with Trinity Rodman, I'm confident from like a reporting standpoint in saying there was freak out in that September, that autumn time frame.
Peak freak was in the fall.
Yeah, in that boardroom. And, again, this is like, I've even had this argument and playfully, and I'm sure someone, folks listening who know will laugh of like, is this the Rodman rule or not? Because, they will tell you that they were talking about it for years and this was the right time to enact it. Well, the very definition of the fact that this was the right time to enact it is because the trend that you're speaking to, Alyssa Thompson leaving, really spiking that to the point that, as I reported in the fall, U.S. Women's National Team head coach Emma Hayes went to the board meeting in New York City and said, I am not telling players to leave, so you can stop thinking that. And so I think, the fact that this rule got enacted when it did is absolutely because of Rodman, and absolutely in the sense that that would have been such a blow on top of the others if she left specifically because of salary when it was clear to everybody that she wanted to stay. So
Yeah. Have you heard anything more about the high impact player rule in terms of how many teams are taking advantage, especially with there being some uncertainty about a potential appeal and what it will look like for their books if somehow that rule is dismantled?
Yeah, I mean, depending who you talk to of whether it could even be dismantled, right? But obviously, I think, it feels like headed toward arbitration, or, I mean, the updates have been a little bit scant lately. But no, I think that we could probably do a whole like show on how the high impact player rule works. So I think to your point about like taking advantage of it, it's the tricky part is like, it's not just, I want to pay the player $1 million. You have to have your whole cap maxed out. So that's where, like, if you're a fan following along, the confusion of like, is Lindsay Heaps a high impact player? Well, she should be, but Denver hasn't used up their cap. And that's like the simplest way I could kind of put that. So I think that on top of the, will this rule stay and will the criteria stay, I think creates confusion for sure. But I think if you're a team, much like Washington did, you basically just have to operate as if this is the rule, this is how we're going to use it. And you have the backing too of even what Megan Burke has said publicly, which is even as the PA is, fighting the sort of criteria and everything, everybody is acknowledged. Once that contract is signed, like it doesn't say I'm a high impact player and here's my contract. It just says I'm making $1 million or $2 million. So at that point, however this plays out as arbitration or whatever else, that contract has to be honored and the league has to figure out a way to do it. So I think that gives you confidence if you're a team.
Yeah, well, and it also in the fact that I would imagine if there were arbitration enough to overturn it and then the league had a bunch of teams on their hands that had committed that money, they would potentially have to just force through a new salary cap raise. Right. They would just have to allow them to spend more because they couldn't hamstring a bunch of teams with deals that no longer fit with their money spend because of this back and forth about whether they'd wrongfully applied language in the CBA.
Which is the PA's whole argument. Yeah, just raise the cap.
Right, exactly. Let the teams decide how they spend it instead of making it be limited. We talked last year about how NWSL viewership was down about midway through the season. We were chatting about it in part because of the absence of triple espresso for most of the season.
Way up on ESPN, Sarah. Let me
good to know. Good to know.
But yes.
Which is why we like when ESPN invests and the summer Sundays are going to be great when there's primetime Sunday viewing that everyone knows they can expect there. What's your prediction for fan interest and engagement this year? And how much is it based really on the storytelling and the organic stories that come out of the players and teams and challenges and rivals?
Yeah, I do agree with the league front office at large and Jessica Berman that there's not enough storytelling around players. I think, again, to the point we were just talking about of like, was there a freak out? Is there still some freak out? However you might sort of classify that about star players leaving. This league needs more stars. And I know some people push back on this idea. We even had some of that in our GM survey, but like stars sell a league to an audience beyond this one that is just in the weeds with it. So Trinity Rodman, I mean, they could have paid her $5 million and it would have been worth it, right? That like they needed her to stay because she resonates beyond the soccer audience. And there's not a ton of that yet. I think, Sophia Wilson and Mallory Swanson coming back will certainly help with that. I mean, we had games last year where, I think they were scheduled before any announcements, right? And it was like Chicago versus Portland or Washington on, a major platform. And it's like, oh, none of the triple espresso are on the field in the spring. So I think that will help. Alyssa Thompson staying would have helped certainly, but Lindsay Heaps coming back. I think the star power needs to drive. So I think there's a need for more storytelling. And then, the wrench in this year is the Men's World Cup. And I know that the league is high on the idea that the Men's World Cup will sort of create some kind of growth or interest for the NWSL.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there's some dissonance there in that idea potentially, but I think that's going to be one, because at minimum it's going to disrupt the season in a very weird way. And, you know, how does that, and it will continue, right? Like you can look at the schedule and Gotham's playing games that are not where they need to be. And
I was going to ask about that. Tournaments outside of NWSL, international stuff, how much is that impacting the footprint this year?
Well, the Men's World Cup is I would say killing the NWSL schedule, from, you know, the Rain playing in Spokane to, you know, having to take the month off. I mean, I think that's a real underscoring of the venue problem that, you know, we've talked about a lot, that Jessica Berman talks about a lot with expansion and everything. So yeah, I think the venue issue is alive and well, and we're seeing it there big time in this season, where teams, you know, Men's World Cup teams have taken over even training facilities for some of these women's teams. So I think that's a big beast to get around. It's not going to go away. 2031, the Women's World Cup is coming. That maybe you could draw a better line from, you know, World Cup.
You get the World Cup bump
to NWSL than the men's one, but yeah.
I mean, I think I did see the NWSL is investing in some storytelling, especially in terms of appealing to younger audiences. They're doing some alt casts. They're doing some content creator influencer type stuff. But I agree. I also think the league itself has absolutely no identity or voice, and that has a real impact on how fans engage with it at large. I think if you look at something like Unrivaled or even the WNBA pre-CBA arguments, there was a real sense of what it stood for and what it meant to be a fan. And people rock WNBA merch as much as they do an individual team. It's not the same in the NWSL. And a lot of that, I think, stems from the front office marketing. They've been looking to rehire that CMO position for like over a year now. I think they just aren't really planting a flag as to we're anything other than soccer. And to me, in the women's sports space, that is so much more necessary than on the men's side. So I look forward to them trying to figure out ways to sell people who aren't quote unquote natural stars, but have great stories, great personalities, could be a star if they, you know, did right by them in a way that I think requires a little bit more creativity. But that's a topic for another time. Couple last questions for you. Sean Nahas, any other final details on that? Or are we just forever going to wonder what the multitude of factors were?
No, I reported at the time. I mean, it was just, you know, I think it was poorly messaged in the end for something that was just like,
bad performance.
More or less your average coach firing. I mean, that's an
so
overgeneralization.
Weird, they were so weird about it. Why'd they make it so weird?
I agree with that. I think it could have been handled better. Yeah.
All right. Speaking of coaches, I can't even count how many new ones are here to start the season or who started midway through last year. I certainly can't pronounce all their names yet, especially the ones from across the pond. Are there any new coaches that you're particularly excited about that you're like, this seems like a great hire, or I like their tactics where they were before, or I think they're going to be a good fit with the talent they're getting?
Well, I'll bring her up again for both the pronunciation you said and for everything else. Philippa Batum in Boston. I think, you know, again, I think it's going to be a fascinating project. Like, how does that come together? I don't think there's been a ton of buzz about like that roster, so to speak. So I think that's one for sure. I think she's the one that jumps out, really. I mean, there's other hires, obviously, that, you know, again, Portland, I mean, I think that was a timeline issue more than anything. You know, Nick Cushing in Denver, again, sort of that dichotomy of what Boston and Denver are doing. I mean, they both come from Europe, at least in that sense. But, you know, he has MLS experience. He has experience sort of seeing how different the world of soccer business is over here, too. So I think those two, you know, from the expansion front will be interesting. And then probably, you know, Alex Strauss in Angel City having a full season, to your point of like what's going to happen in Angel City, you know, coming in, whether it's a coach or a player halfway through a season is difficult and creates some issues. So I think, you know, having that full season, what's going to happen there? How does it come together? Because again, you know, the inconsistencies you can kind of excuse from him entering in the summer to Alyssa Thompson leaving in September, but now it's got to start coming together.
Right. Well, and I think also it's always like, I get it when GMs or presidents come in and they give you a certain number of days that they tell you is required to turn something around. The problem is once you put those days out, people start counting backwards from them, thinking Chicago, thinking Angel City, right? So then you have to start, you know, making good on whatever you say is your 2-year plan or your however many day plan. Last question for you. Anything else you're just keeping an eye on this season? Big picture issues or items that you think are going to come up this year?
I think expansion's always like the big thing. I mean, Atlanta's already in. I think we're going to see an 18th team admitted at some point. And is it in time for joining them in 2028? I mean, Jeff Carlisle and I reported on Columbus being very interested. I think, is in the mix of certainly most serious type of bids or cities and groups. I think I'm like the calendar nerd too. I'm really interested in what this league decides because having covered that from years ago when they were debating it, they've just kind of put it off. And now MLS is shifting their calendar. And I don't know that it's going to flip or imminently flip, but I don't think you can keep putting it off either. And, they're admitting some more northern locations, at least like I wouldn't want to, even with a winter break, I wouldn't want to see Boston or Denver trying to play in December or early February or any of that. So
Chicago, right on the lake. That'd be great.
On the lake, yeah. Yeah. So
the ball's it'd be like playing as a kid. The ball keeps going in the water because of the wind. You have to have 20 balls a game.
Yeah. So, I think big stuff like that, calendar issue, venues, again, I don't think this venue problem is going to go away. And I think it's going to be when you start actually seeing the game in Spokane and seeing the schedule get changed because some game has to move. I think that's when people are going to be like, oh yeah, really? We have like third and fourth tenants in these stadiums. So those are sort of recurring themes, really. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. When we all start to suddenly have to know things about Rhode Island, like we've been able to ignore them for so long.
I like Rhode Island.
I'm sure it's fine. You East Coast people are weird though. Everybody just like that. You have games in different states and it feels totally normal. Here in Chicago, the idea of putting the Bears in Indiana, even if it's 15 minutes away, we're like, what? That's not possible. That's not Illinois. And out in the East Coast, y'all are just the blurred lines over there. Well, Jeff, we're super excited for the season to start as quickly as it came upon us. And we feel even more ready now that we've taken up way too much of your time to break it down for us. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sarah.